The morning sun filtered through the cracked kitchen window of the small cottage at the edge of Whitmore Lane, casting thin, golden lines across the worn linoleum floor. Eleanor Hayes stood at the sink, her hands submerged in lukewarm water, scrubbing dirt from beneath her fingernails. At 42, she had grown accustomed to invisibility. Her neighbors walked past without greeting. The mailman left packages at the wrong door. Even her own reflection in store windows seemed to blur, as if the world had collectively decided she was not worth noticing. She dried her hands on a faded dish towel and looked out at the overgrown lot next door. For 15 years, the Victorian mansion had stood empty, its windows like hollow eyes, watching the neighborhood decay around it. Eleanor had made the adjacent garden her sanctuary. No one else wanted it. No one else cared. The city had forgotten to maintain it, and eventually, so had everyone else, except her. She stepped outside, the screen door creaking behind her. The September air carried the first hints of autumn, crisp and clean, smelling of fallen leaves and distant chimney smoke. Eleanor knelt beside a row of chrysanthemums she had planted 3 springs ago. Their petals were beginning to open, deep burgundy and soft gold, a small triumph against the neglect that surrounded them. Her fingers worked the soil with practiced ease. Gardening had become her meditation, her escape from the silence of her empty house. Her husband had left 7 years ago, taking with him the last shreds of her confidence. Her daughter had moved to California and rarely called. Her parents had passed within months of each other, leaving her alone in a town that seemed determined to forget she existed. The sound of engines broke the morning stillness. Eleanor looked up, shielding her eyes against the sun. 3 black SUVs rolled down Whitmore Lane, their tinted windows reflecting nothing but sky. They stopped in front of the abandoned mansion. Next door. She watched as men in dark suits emerged, their movements precise and coordinated like a choreographed performance. They spoke into earpieces, scanned the perimeter, and positioned themselves at strategic points around the property. Eleanor had never seen anything like it outside of movies. Then the rear door of the middle vehicle opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, perhaps 6'2", with broad shoulders that tapered to a narrow waist. His hair was dark, streaked with silver at the temples, and his jaw was sharp enough to cast shadows. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Eleanor earned in 3 months at the library. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. Even from this distance, she could see they were grey, the color of storm clouds before rain. He stood motionless for a moment, surveying his new domain. Then his gaze swept across the property line and landed directly on Eleanor. She froze, her hands still buried in the soil. For one endless second, their eyes met. His expression was unreadable, a mask of controlled composure that revealed nothing. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. Eleanor nodded back, unsure what else to do. The man turned and walked toward the mansion, his entourage falling into formation around him. The front door opened without anyone appearing to touch it, and he disappeared inside. She remained kneeling in the garden, her heart beating faster than it had in years. Who was this man who moved with such authority, surrounded by guards like a president or a king? What business did he have in their quiet, forgotten neighborhood? The questions lingered as she returned to her work, but she pushed them aside. Wealthy people were eccentric. Perhaps he was a tech billionaire seeking privacy. Perhaps he was a foreign diplomat. Whatever he was, it was none of her concern. She had learned long ago that curiosity about other people only led to disappointment. The days that followed brought more activity to the mansion. Workers arrived in white vans, carrying equipment and materials through the iron gates. The sound of hammering and drilling echoed across the garden, punctuated by shouts in languages Eleanor could not identify. The property was being transformed, renovated from its decades of neglect into something grand once more. Eleanor continued her routine, rising at dawn to tend the garden before her shift at the Whitmore Public Library. She pruned the rose bushes, weeded the vegetable patch, and carefully staked the tomato plants that had grown heavy with fruit. The garden was her masterpiece, a testament to what could be achieved through patience and dedication. It sprawled across the forgotten lot like a secret paradise, filled with colors and fragrances that seemed impossible in such a neglected corner of the world. On the fourth day, she noticed someone watching her. The man from the SUV stood on the mansion's back terrace, a coffee cup in his hand, observing her with that same unreadable expression. Eleanor pretended not to see him, focusing intently on the hydrangeas she was pruning, but she could feel his gaze like a physical presence, heavy and persistent. When she finally looked up, he raised his cup in a silent toast. Then he turned and walked back inside. That evening, Eleanor sat in her kitchen nursing a cup of chamomile tea. The encounter had unsettled her in ways she could not explain. She was accustomed to being overlooked, to moving through life, without drawing attention. But this man saw her. He noticed her, and something in his eyes suggested he was not the kind of person who noticed things without purpose. She told herself she was being paranoid. He was simply a wealthy neighbor, observing his new surroundings. There was nothing sinister about it, and yet she found herself locking her doors that night, checking the windows twice before climbing into bed. The next morning, she found a small white envelope tucked beneath her garden. Gate. Her name was written on the front in elegant script, Eleanor Hayes. No return address, no postage. Someone had delivered it by hand. She opened it with trembling fingers and extracted a single card. The message was brief and typed in clean black letters. The garden is beautiful. Would you consider maintaining the grounds of the estate as well? Compensation will be generous. A meeting can be arranged at your convenience. It was signed with a single initial. D. Eleanor read the card, 3. Times certain she was misunderstanding something. She was a librarian, not a professional gardener. Her skills were self-taught, developed through years of trial and error in a lot no one else wanted. The idea that someone would pay her to garden seemed absurd, and yet the offer was tempting. Her salary at the library barely covered her bills. The house needed repairs she could not afford. A second income, even a modest one, would change everything. She spent the day at work, distracted, her mind returning again and again to the card in her purse. By evening she had made her decision. She would at least hear what this mysterious neighbor had to say. The following afternoon, Eleanor stood at the mansion's front gate, her best cardigan buttoned against the autumn chill. The iron bars had been freshly painted black, and the driveway beyond was now smooth and pristine. A security camera swiveled to track her movement. Before she could press the intercom button, the gate swung open. She walked up the driveway, her sensible shoes crunching on the gravel. The mansion loomed before her, its Victorian architecture restored to former glory. Fresh paint covered the walls, the windows gleamed, and the front garden had been cleared of weeds, leaving only bare earth waiting to be planted. The front door opened as she reached the steps. A man in a dark suit stood in the entrance, his expression neutral but alert. He gestured for her to enter without speaking. Eleanor stepped into the foyer and gasped. The interior was breathtaking. A crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling, casting rainbow prisms across marble floors. A sweeping staircase curved upward to the second floor, its banister carved from dark wood, polished to a mirror shine. The air smelled of fresh paint and something else, something warm and masculine, like sandalwood and leather. The suited man led her through a series of hallways to a study at the back of the house. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes in multiple languages. A massive desk dominated the center of the room, and behind it sat the man from the terrace. He rose as she entered, buttoning his jacket with a practiced motion. Up close, he was even more striking than she had realized. His features were angular but not harsh, softened by the hint of lines around his eyes. He extended his hand. "Mrs. Hayes, thank you for coming. I am Dominic Cavallo." His voice was deep and smooth, carrying the faint trace of an accent she could not place. Italian perhaps, or Mediterranean. She shook his hand, surprised by the warmth of his grip. "Please sit." He gestured to a leather chair facing the desk. "Can I offer you something to drink? Coffee? Tea? Wine?" "Water would be fine," Eleanor managed. He nodded to the suited man, who disappeared through a side door. Dominic settled back into his chair, his grey eyes studying her with quiet intensity. "I have been watching your garden," he said. "It is remarkable. The way you have transformed that abandoned lot into something beautiful. It speaks of patience and skill." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. "It is just a hobby, something to pass the time." "It is more than that." He leaned forward slightly. "I am renovating this property. The house is nearly complete, but the grounds remain barren. I need someone who understands plants, who can create something lasting. I believe you are that person." "Mr. Cavallo, I am flattered, but I am not a professional. I have no formal training. Training can be acquired, vision cannot." He paused as the suited man returned with a crystal glass of water. "I am prepared to offer you a substantial salary, far more than you currently earn. You would have access to whatever resources you need. Plants, equipment, additional workers. The only requirement is that you create something extraordinary." Eleanor took a sip of water, buying time to collect her thoughts. The offer was beyond generous. It was life-changing. But something about the situation felt off. Men like Dominic Cavallo did not simply appear in forgotten neighborhoods and offer fortunes to unknown librarians. "Why me?" she asked. "There are professional landscape designers, people with credentials and experience. Why would you choose someone like me?" His expression flickered, too quick to read. "Because you see beauty where others see nothing. That is a rare gift, Mrs. Hayes. Rarer than you know." She wanted to ask more, to press him on who he was and why he was really here. But something in his eyes stopped her. There was sadness there, hidden beneath the composure, a weariness that spoke of burdens carried alone. "I will need to think about it," she said finally. "Of course." He rose and extended his hand again. "Take all the time you need. My offer will remain open." She shook his hand and allowed the suited man to escort her back through the mansion. At the front door she paused and looked back. Dominic Cavallo stood in the doorway of his study, watching her with that same unreadable gaze. That night, Eleanor lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her bedroom. She had always prided herself on being sensible, on making safe choices that kept her life predictable and manageable. But predictability had led her here, to a small house in a forgotten neighborhood, invisible and alone. Perhaps it was time for something different. The next morning she walked to the mansion and pressed the intercom button. "I accept your offer," she said. There was a brief pause. Then the gate swung open, and Eleanor Hayes stepped into a world she could not have imagined. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. Stories like this one remind us that sometimes the most extraordinary chapters of our lives begin when we least expect them. Subscribe now so you never miss another tale of transformation and hope. 3 weeks had passed since Eleanor began working at the Cavallo estate, and already the grounds were beginning to transform. She had started with the front garden, clearing the bare earth and enriching it with compost and nutrients. Now, rows of chrysanthemums and asters lined the walkway, their autumn colors blazing against the mansion's pale walls. Dominic Cavallo proved to be an unusual employer. He was generous with resources, ordering whatever plants and materials she requested without question. He gave her complete creative freedom, trusting her vision without interference. And yet, he remained enigmatic, appearing occasionally to observe her work, but revealing little about himself. She learned fragments about him through observation and careful listening. He ran some kind of import business, dealing in art and antiques from Europe. He had no wife or children that she could see, though the mansion had been designed to accommodate a family. His men, always present but unobtrusive, called him Boss or Mr. Cavallo, never Dominic. The townspeople whispered about him. Eleanor heard the rumors at the grocery store, at the library, at the pharmacy where she filled her prescriptions. Some said he was a foreign investor, laundering money through real estate. Others claimed he was in witness protection, hiding from enemies overseas. A few, voices lowered to near silence, suggested he was connected to organized crime. Eleanor dismissed the gossip. People always invented stories about the wealthy and mysterious. It made their ordinary lives feel more exciting by proximity. She had No evidence that Dominic was anything other than what he claimed to be, an eccentric businessman with a passion for privacy. Besides, he had been nothing but kind to her. He remembered how she took her coffee. He asked about her daughter in California, her work at the library, her favorite books. He listened when she spoke, truly listened, in a way no one had in years. "You have a gift for making things grow," he told her one afternoon, watching as she planted a row of lavender along the garden wall. "Where did you learn?" Eleanor sat back on her heels, wiping soil from her hands. "My grandmother. She had a farm in Vermont, and I spent every summer there as a child. She taught me that plants respond to attention and care, just like people. They know when someone loves them. And do you love them? These plants?" She considered the question. "I suppose I do. They give me purpose, something to nurture when everything else feels empty." Dominic was silent for a moment. Then he said, quietly, "I understand that feeling." She looked up at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his voice, but his expression had already closed, the mask of composure sliding back into place. "The lavender is beautiful," he said. "It reminds me of my mother's garden in Sicily." "You are from Sicily?" "I was born there. I left when I was young." He paused. "Another lifetime ago." He turned and walked back toward the mansion, leaving Eleanor with more questions than answers. She watched him go, noting the slight tension in his shoulders, the weight he seemed to carry with every step. That evening she stayed late in the garden, unable to shake the image of his face when he spoke of Sicily. There had been pain there, old and deep. Whatever had brought Dominic Cavallo to this forgotten corner of America, it had not been a simple business decision. The next morning, she found a book on her workbench. It was an antique volume, bound in weathered leather, its pages yellowed with age. The title was embossed in gold, Mediterranean Gardens, a History. Inside the front cover, a handwritten note read, "For Eleanor, who brings beauty to barren places. D." She held the book against her chest, moved by the gesture. No one had given her a gift in longer than she could remember. The simple act of thoughtfulness touched something deep inside her, a place she had believed was beyond reaching. As the weeks passed, Eleanor found herself looking forward to her work at the estate in a way she had not anticipated. The garden was flourishing, and so was something else, a quiet friendship that grew between her and Dominic like vines climbing a trellis. He began joining her for afternoon tea, sitting on the terrace while she worked, discussing books and music and philosophy. She discovered he was fluent in 5 languages, that he had studied art history at Oxford, that he could recite Dante in the original Italian. He was brilliant and cultured, a man of deep intellect and refined taste. But beneath the sophistication, she sensed something else. A hardness that appeared in his eyes when certain topics arose, a controlled fury that flickered when his phone rang with urgent news, the way his men deferred to him with an almost fearful respect. She began to suspect the rumors might not be entirely false. One afternoon she arrived at the estate to find the gates closed and guards posted at every entrance. The usual staff was absent, replaced by men she did not recognize, their faces grim and watchful. Her heart began to race. She pressed the intercom button, and after a long pause, a voice crackled through the speaker. "Mrs. Hayes, please wait. Mr. Cavallo will see you shortly." She stood at the gate for 10 minutes, her anxiety growing with each passing second. Finally, Dominic himself appeared, walking down the driveway with a cell phone pressed to his ear. He spoke rapidly in Italian, his tone sharp and commanding. When he reached the gate, he ended the call and looked at her with an expression she had never seen before, cold and calculating, the gaze of a man accustomed to danger. "Eleanor," his voice softened slightly, "I apologize for the inconvenience. There has been a security concern. It would be best if you did not work today. Is everything all right? Are you in trouble?" Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that she would ask, that she would care. "Nothing I cannot handle," he said. "Please go home. I will contact you when it is safe. To return." She wanted to argue, to press for more information, but the look on his face told her this was not a moment for questions. She nodded and turned to leave. "Eleanor." His voice stopped her. "Thank you. For your concern." She glanced back and saw something in his expression that made her chest tighten. Loneliness. The same loneliness she saw in her own mirror every morning. "Be careful," she said softly. He nodded once, then walked back toward the mansion. The gates closed behind him, with a heavy clang. Eleanor spent the rest of the day at home, unable to concentrate on anything. She tried to read, to clean, to distract herself with television, but her mind kept returning to Dominic, to the danger that had appeared so suddenly in his carefully controlled world. Who was he really? What had he done to attract such threats? And why, despite everything, did she find herself more worried about him than afraid? The phone rang at 9 in the evening. She answered it with trembling hands. "Eleanor, it is Dominic. The situation has been resolved. You may return tomorrow if you wish." She let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "What happened?" A pause. "A business competitor attempted to interfere with my operations. They have been persuaded to reconsider." The word persuaded hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "No. I am fine." Another pause. "You should not concern yourself with my affairs. They are complicated, and often unpleasant. It is better if you focus on the garden and let me handle the rest." "Dominic," she said his name without thinking, the formality of Mr. Cavallo suddenly inadequate. "I may not know everything about you, but I know enough to see that you are carrying something heavy. If you ever need someone to talk to, I am here." Silence stretched across the phone line. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. "You are a remarkable woman, Eleanor Hayes. More remarkable than, you know." He hung up before she could respond. The next morning she returned to the estate to find everything normal. The guards had resumed their usual positions, the staff had returned, and the mansion hummed with quiet activity. But something had changed. The way Dominic looked at her was different now, more open, more vulnerable. Over the following weeks, their conversations deepened. He began to share pieces of his past, fragments of a story she was only beginning to understand. He told her about his father, a powerful man in Sicily who had raised him to inherit an empire, about his mother, who had died when he was 12, leaving him alone in a world of violence and ambition, about the choices he had made as a young man, choices that had led him down a path he could not easily leave. "I have done things I'm not proud of," he admitted one evening, as they sat on the terrace watching the sun set behind the mountains. "Things that would make you see me differently if you knew." Eleanor considered his words carefully. "We have all done things we regret. The question is whether we let them define us or whether we grow beyond them." He turned to look at her, his grey eyes searching her face. "Do you believe people can change, Eleanor? Truly change? I believe they can try. And sometimes trying is enough." He reached out and took her hand. His palm was warm and rough, the hand of a man who had known both luxury and hardship. He held her gently, as if she were something precious and fragile. "You make me want to try," he said quietly. Eleanor felt her heart swell with an emotion she had thought lost forever. Hope. After so many years of emptiness, of invisible existence, someone finally saw her. Someone finally cared. She squeezed his hand in return. "Then try," she said, "and I will be here to help you." The garden had become a masterpiece. Roses climbed the mansion's walls in cascades of red and white. Lavender perfumed the air with its sweet, calming fragrance. Vegetable beds overflowed with tomatoes and peppers and herbs. Stone pathways wound through flower beds and meditation areas, creating a landscape that seemed transplanted from a European fairy tale. Eleanor stood in the center of it all, marveling at what she had created. This had started as a forgotten lot, a patch of weeds and neglect. Now it was something beautiful, a testament to what patience and love could achieve. Dominic emerged from the mansion and walked toward her. His usual composure softened by a rare smile. "It is finished," he said, looking around at the transformed grounds, "more beautiful than I could have imagined." "It is never really finished," Eleanor replied. "Gardens are living things. They grow and change constantly. Like people." She met his eyes. "Like people." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, that familiar sandalwood and leather that had become associated with safety and warmth. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something I should have told you from the beginning." Her heart began to race. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "The rumors you have heard about me, they are not entirely false. I am not simply a businessman. I am the head of a family, an organization that operates outside the law. What you would call a crime family." The words hung in the air between them like a verdict. Eleanor felt the world tilt slightly, her carefully constructed understanding of this man crumbling before her. "I never wanted to deceive you," he continued, "but I was afraid that if you knew the truth you would leave, and I could not bear to lose the one person who has made me feel human again." Eleanor was silent for a long moment. She thought about everything she had seen over the past months, the guards, the mysterious phone calls, the security concerns. She thought about the man before her, with his cultured mind and his hidden pain and his desperate desire for connection. "Why are you telling me now?" she asked. "Because you deserve the truth, and because I am trying to change. I have begun the process of transitioning my operations to legitimate enterprises. It will take time, years perhaps, but I am committed to becoming a different man, a better man." "And what prompted this change?" He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You did, Eleanor. You showed me that there is still beauty in the world, still goodness worth protecting. You made me believe that transformation is possible." She wanted to be angry. She wanted to feel betrayed. But all she felt was a profound sadness for the life he had been forced to live and a fragile hope for the man he was trying to become. "This is a lot to process," she said finally. "I know. And I do not expect an answer right now. Take whatever time you need. Just know that my feelings for you are real, regardless of what you decide." He turned and walked back toward the mansion, leaving her alone in the garden she had created from nothing. That night, Eleanor sat in her kitchen, the weight of Dominic's revelation pressing down on her like a physical force. She had always prided herself on her good judgment, on her ability to read people and situations accurately. How had she missed the signs? How had she allowed herself to become entangled with a man living such a double life? But even as she questioned herself, another voice spoke up. The voice of the lonely woman who had tended a forgotten garden because no one else would. The voice that recognized the same isolation in Dominic's eyes that she saw in her own. He was not a good man, by conventional standards, but he was trying to be better. And was that not the most any of us could offer? She thought about her own life, the safe choices she had made, the dreams she had abandoned. She had spent years hiding from the world, invisible and unnoticed. Dominic had offered her something different, a chance to matter, to be seen, to participate in something larger than herself. Was she brave enough to take it? The days that followed were filled with reflection. Eleanor continued her work at the garden, maintaining the beds and planning new additions, but her mind was elsewhere. She watched Dominic from a distance, observing how he interacted with his staff, how he spoke on the phone, how he carried himself through the world. She saw a man struggling against his nature, fighting to become something better than his past had made him. She saw someone who needed not judgment, but understanding, someone who needed to be saved as much as she did. A week after his confession, she knocked on the door of his study. "Come in," he called. She entered to find him at his desk, papers spread before him, the weight of responsibility evident in every line of his face. He looked up at her with an expression of guarded hope. "Eleanor, please, sit down." She remained standing. "I have been thinking about what you told me. About who you are and what you have done." He nodded slowly. And I have realized something." We are all flawed, Dominic. We have all made choices we regret. The measure of a person is not the mistakes they have made, but the courage they show in trying to correct them. His eyes glistened. What are you saying? I am saying that I choose to see the man you are becoming, not the man you were. I am saying that I am willing to stand beside you as you fight for your redemption if you will have me. He rose from his desk and crossed the room in 3 quick strides. He took her hands in his, gripping them as if she were an anchor in a storm. Eleanor, I do not deserve this. I do not deserve you. Perhaps not, she said with a gentle smile. But we rarely get what we deserve. Sometimes we get what we need. He pulled her into his arms and held her close. She could feel his heart beating against her chest, rapid and strong, the heart of a man who had forgotten what it felt like to be loved. If this story has touched your heart, take a moment right now to leave a comment saying, I believe in second chances. Let me know that you are watching, that these stories of hope and transformation matter to you. The autumn deepened into winter, and with it came a new chapter in Eleanor's life. She had moved into the mansion at Dominic's request, not as his employee, but as his partner. The small cottage on Whitmore Lane stood empty now, a relic of her former existence. Living with Dominic was nothing like she had imagined. Despite the opulence of their surroundings, their daily life was remarkably ordinary. They ate breakfast together each morning, discussing the news and their plans for the day. They walked through the garden in the afternoons, Eleanor pointing out the changes in the plants while Dominic listened with genuine interest. They read books by the fire in the evenings, comfortable in each other's silence. But the other world, the shadow world of Dominic's past, continued to intrude. There were meetings in the study, doors closed and voices low. There were late-night phone calls that pulled him from her side. There were visitors whose cold eyes and careful movements marked them as men of violence. Eleanor tried not to ask questions. She had accepted Dominic knowing who he was, and she would not undermine that acceptance with constant interrogation. But she could not help noticing the toll his work took on him, the sleepless nights, the tension in his shoulders, the way he sometimes looked at her as if memorizing her face, afraid she might disappear. One evening in early December, she found him in the study, staring at a photograph on his desk. It showed a young woman with dark hair and laughing eyes, holding a baby in her arms. "Who is she?" Eleanor asked softly. Dominic did not look up. "My mother. And me. It was taken just before she died." Eleanor moved closer and placed a hand on his shoulder. "She was beautiful. She was everything. Good in my life. When I lost her, I lost my connection to that goodness. I became what my father wanted me to be, hard and ruthless and efficient. It was the only way to survive. But you are not that person anymore." He finally looked at her, his grey eyes filled with a pain that seemed bottomless. "Am I not? Sometimes I wonder if I am simply pretending, playing a role that you need me to play." "Dominic." She knelt beside him, taking his hands in hers. "Pretending would be easier. Change is the hardest thing a person can do. The fact that you struggle with it proves that it is real." He raised her hands to his lips and kissed them gently. "How did I find you, Eleanor? In all the world, how did I find someone who sees me so clearly?" "Perhaps you did not find me," she said. "Perhaps we found each other, 2 lonely people tending their forgotten gardens, waiting for something to grow." He pulled her close, and she felt the tension begin to drain from his body. This was what she could offer him, not solutions to his problems, but a presence that reminded him he was not alone. Christmas approached and the mansion was transformed. Eleanor supervised the decorations, stringing lights through the garden and placing a towering tree in the main hall. The staff, who had grown fond of her during her months of work, helped with enthusiasm. Even Dominic's guards seemed to soften, their stern faces occasionally breaking into smiles. On Christmas Eve, they sat together by the fire, watching the flames dance and listening to carols playing softly from the speakers. Snow fell outside the windows, blanketing the garden in white. "I have a gift for you," Dominic said, producing a small velvet box from his pocket. Eleanor's heart skipped. "Dominic, what is this?" He opened the box to reveal a ring, a simple band of white gold set with a single emerald the color of spring leaves. Not ostentatious, not flashy, but elegant and meaningful. "This belonged to my mother," he said. "She left it to me when she died, with instructions that I should give it to the woman I loved. I have waited 40 years for that woman, Eleanor. I did not know if I would ever find her. But here you are, the most unexpected gift of my life." Tears streamed down Eleanor's cheeks. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I am asking you to be my partner, my companion, my anchor. Whether we formalize it with a ceremony or simply live as we are, I want you by my side. Forever." She took the ring from the box and slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "Yes," she said, 1,000 times yes." He kissed her then, tender and deep, and she felt something she had thought lost forever bloom inside her chest. Love. Real, terrifying, transformative love. The new year brought new challenges. Dominic's transition to legitimate business was proving more difficult than anticipated. Old associates resented his withdrawal. Competitors sensed weakness and pressed their advantage. Threats that had seemed distant now felt immediate and personal. Eleanor found herself included in conversations she never expected to witness. Dominic no longer tried to shield her from the realities of his world. He shared his concerns, sought her counsel, treated her as a true partner rather than a delicate accessory. "There are people who want to stop what I am doing," he told her one evening. "They profit from the old ways and see my change as a threat to their interests. They will do whatever is necessary to pull me back." "What do they want?" "Control, power, everything I am trying to give up." He paused. "I may have to confront them directly. It could be dangerous." Fear gripped Eleanor's heart, but she refused to let it show. "Then confront them. But promise me you will be careful. Promise me you will come back." He cupped her face in his hands. "I will always come back to you, Eleanor. You are my reason for fighting, my reason for changing, my reason for everything." The confrontation came on a cold night in late January. Eleanor waited in the study, unable to sleep, listening for any sound that might signal Dominic's return. Hours passed. The clock struck midnight, then 1, then 2. At 3 in the morning, the front door opened. She rushed to the entrance hall and found Dominic standing there, his suit rumpled but intact. Behind him, his men carried someone on a stretcher, a figure she did not recognize. "It is done," Dominic said, his voice weary but triumphant. "The old guard has been neutralized. We are free." Eleanor threw her arms around him, not caring about protocol or propriety. He held her tightly, his body trembling with exhaustion and relief. "I promised I would come back," he whispered, "and I always keep my promises." Spring returned to the garden with renewed vigor. The flowers Eleanor had planted burst into bloom, painting the grounds in a riot of color that seemed to celebrate the new chapter in their lives. Cherry blossoms lined the pathways, tulips swayed in the breeze, and the roses climbed higher than ever before. Eleanor walked among the beds each morning, marveling at what they had created together, not just the garden, but the life they were building within its walls. A life of partnership and purpose, of love that had grown from the most unlikely soil. Dominic had been true to his word. The transition to legitimate operations was nearly complete. The family's investments now flowed through legal channels, art galleries and import companies and real estate ventures that bore his name openly, rather than hiding behind layers of deception. There had been costs. Old relationships had been severed. Former allies had become enemies. The process of change had exposed vulnerabilities that required constant vigilance, but Dominic bore it all with a determination that Eleanor found inspiring. "I never thought I could do this," he confessed one evening, as they sat on the terrace watching the sun set. "For so long I believed I was trapped by my father's legacy, by the choices I made as a young man. I thought there was no way out." "What changed your mind?" He turned to look at her, his grey eyes soft with emotion. "You did. You showed me that even the most neglected ground can produce something beautiful. You gave me hope when I had none." She reached for his hand. "We gave each other hope. That is what love does." Their wedding took place in May, in the garden Eleanor had created from nothing. It was a small ceremony, attended only by the household staff and a handful of trusted friends. Eleanor wore a simple white dress and carried a bouquet of flowers she had grown herself. Dominic waited at the altar, his usual composure replaced by an expression of pure joy. As she walked down the aisle toward him, Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought her here, the years of loneliness and invisibility, the forgotten garden that had been her refuge, the stranger who had appeared next door and changed everything. She had spent so long believing that her life was over, that the best chapters had already been written. But here she was, at the beginning of something new, something beautiful. "I do," she said when the moment came. "I do," Dominic echoed. And as they kissed beneath the cherry blossoms, Eleanor felt a peace she had never known before, the peace of belonging, the peace of being seen. The months that followed were the happiest of her life. She continued to tend the garden, expanding its boundaries and experimenting with new designs. Dominic threw himself into his legitimate businesses, working long hours but always returning home to her at the end of the day. They established routines and rituals that gave shape to their shared existence. Morning coffee on the terrace, evening walks through the garden, Sunday dinners with the staff, who had become like family. Eleanor even reconciled with her daughter in California. They spoke on the phone regularly now, and plans were underway for a visit in the fall. Her daughter had been shocked by the news of her mother's marriage, by the transformation that had occurred in her absence. But she was also happy, genuinely happy, to see Eleanor finally living rather than merely existing. "You sound different, Mom," she said during one of their calls. "Younger, lighter." "I feel different," Eleanor admitted. "For the first time in years, I feel alive." But even in paradise, shadows lingered. One afternoon in June, Eleanor noticed a car parked outside the estate gates. It was not one of the security vehicles or the regular staff cars. It sat there for hours, its windows tinted, its occupants invisible. She mentioned it to Dominic that evening. His expression darkened. "I will look into it, probably nothing, but it pays to be cautious." The car did not return the next day, or the day after, but Eleanor could not shake the feeling of being watched. She found herself looking over her shoulder as she worked in the garden, listening for sounds that did not belong. A week later, she received a letter. It was addressed to her personally, delivered not through the mansion's mail system, but slipped beneath the gate. The handwriting was unfamiliar. She opened it with trembling hands. "Mrs. Cavallo," it read, "you do not know me, but I know you. I know what your husband has done. I know the lives he has destroyed. You think he has changed, but people like him do not change. They simply hide their true nature until the moment is right to strike." There was no signature, no return address. Eleanor stood in the garden, the letter clutched in her fist, her heart pounding with fear and confusion. Should she show it to Dominic? Would doing so only cause him pain, dredging up a past he was trying so hard to escape? She made her decision. That evening, she handed him the letter without a word. He read it in silence, his face betraying nothing. When he finished, he set the letter on his desk and looked at her with steady eyes. "This is from someone who wants to see me fail. There are many such people. They cannot accept that change is possible. But how did they know about me? How did they know my name? My enemies are resourceful. They have been watching me for years, waiting for a weakness to exploit." He rose and took her hands. "You are not weak, Eleanor. You are my strength. And I will not allow anyone to threaten what we have built together. What will you do?" "I will find out who sent this, and I will ensure they cannot hurt us." There was steel in his voice, a hardness that reminded her of the man he had been before, but she understood now that the hardness was not cruelty. It was protection, the ferocity of someone who finally had something worth fighting for. "Be careful," she said, echoing the words she had spoken months ago. "Promise me you will be careful." "I promise," he said. Always. The investigation into the threatening letter consumed the following weeks. Dominic worked with his security team, tracking leads and eliminating suspects. Eleanor tried to maintain her routine, tending the garden and managing the household, but the shadow of uncertainty hung over everything. Then, on a Thursday afternoon in late July, the truth emerged. Eleanor was in the garden, pruning the rose bushes, when Dominic appeared on the terrace. His face was grim, and he beckoned her inside. They sat in the study, and he told her what he had discovered. The letters had been sent by a man named Vincent Caruso, a former associate who had refused to accept Dominic's transition to legitimate business. Caruso had lost money and power when the old networks dissolved, and he blamed Dominic personally for his misfortune. But it was not just about money. Caruso had been connected to some of the darkest aspects of the old operations. When Dominic cut ties with him, he had also cut Caruso's access to protection and resources. Caruso was now facing investigation by federal authorities, and he saw destroying Dominic's new life as his only path to revenge. "He wanted to turn you against me," Dominic explained. "He knew that you were my weakness, that losing you would destroy me more effectively than any attack on my business. So what happens now?" "Caruso has been dealt with. He is in federal custody, cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for leniency. He will not trouble us again." Eleanor felt a wave of relief wash over her. "It is really over. It is really over." Dominic reached for her hand. "The past cannot hurt us anymore, Eleanor. We are free to build whatever future we choose." She squeezed his hand, feeling the weight of months of tension finally begin to lift. They had survived. Their love had survived. And now, at last, they could look forward without fear. The summer gave way to autumn, and the garden prepared for its winter rest. Eleanor walked among the beds, taking note of what had thrived and what needed adjustment. She was already planning next year's plantings, imagining new colors and textures that would transform the grounds even further. Dominic found her there one evening, kneeling beside a patch of chrysanthemums. "Still working?" he asked. "Always," she replied with a smile. "A garden is never truly finished." "Neither is a life," he said, "but perhaps that is the beauty of it." He helped her to her feet, and they walked together through the grounds, hand in hand. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the pathways, and painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I have been thinking," Dominic said, "about what we might do next, about how we might use what we have built to help others." "What do you mean?" "This garden you have created, it has brought beauty to a place that knew only neglect. What if we did the same for people? What if we established a foundation, a program, to help those who have been forgotten by society?" Eleanor stopped walking and turned to face him. "You want to start a charity?" "I want to give back. I have taken so much in my life, caused so much pain. It is time to balance the scales, to create something that endures beyond us." She felt her eyes fill with tears. This was the man she had believed he could become. This was the transformation she had hoped for. "I think that is a wonderful idea," she said, "and I want to help. We can do this together." He pulled her into his arms and held her close. Around them, the garden they had nurtured together rustled in the evening breeze, a living testament to what was possible when love and patience were given the chance to grow. In the years that followed, the Cavallo Foundation became a beacon of hope in the community. They funded job training programs for those who had been incarcerated. They established scholarships for underprivileged students. They created green spaces in forgotten neighborhoods, gardens like the one that had brought Eleanor and Dominic together. Eleanor's daughter visited that Christmas, bringing her own family to see the grandmother who had found love in the most unexpected place. They walked through the garden together, 3 generations united by bonds of blood and choice. "This is amazing, Mom," her daughter said, looking around at the winter landscape, barren but beautiful in its quiet dormancy. "I never imagined you could create something like this." "Neither did I," Eleanor admitted. "But sometimes life surprises us. Sometimes the chapters we never expected to write become the most important ones. Dominic found them there, and he was welcomed into the family circle without reservation. The man who had once been a crime boss sat on the floor playing games with his step-grandchildren, his laughter filling the mansion with a warmth that had been absent for far too long. That night, after the guests had gone to bed, Eleanor and Dominic sat by the fire, watching the flames as they had so many times before. "Are you happy?" he asked. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied. "And you have no regrets about choosing me, about staying despite everything you learned?" She took his hand and held it against her heart. "The only regret I could have is if I had let fear stop me, if I had walked away when you first told me the truth." "What made you stay?" She thought for a moment before answering. "I saw someone who was trying, someone who wanted to be better but did not know how. And I realized that we were the same, you and I, both of us tending our forgotten gardens, waiting for something beautiful to grow." He raised her hand to his lips. "You are my garden, Eleanor, the most beautiful thing I have ever known." She smiled and leaned her head against his shoulder. Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the garden in white, but beneath the surface, the roots were strong and deep, waiting for spring. They had found each other in the most unlikely place. Two lonely souls who had learned that it was never too late for transformation, never too late for love. And as the fire crackled and the snow fell, Eleanor Hayes Cavallo knew that she would never be invisible again. If you have watched this far, it is because you liked this story. Leave a comment saying, "I have watched this far so I can get to know you and see who really enjoys the stories here on the channel." If this tale of hope and transformation touched your heart, please give it a like and share it with someone who needs to believe that it is never too late to start again. And if you are not already subscribed, click that subscribe button so you never miss another story. Thank you for being part of this journey. Until next time.